In total, for how many years have you been in practice?
30 odd years. I first started practicing in 1987.
Now, for how many years have you been senior counsel?
6 years.
6 years. And how long have you acted as a judge?
I've acted 2.5 terms.
That translates to about how many months?
About 6 months in total.
How long does it ordinarily take you to finalize a judgment?
Most of my judgments I give orally at the end of argument. If I do not, then normally within 2 weeks. The longest I've had is the Teptal judgment, which was a very difficult one. It's in the papers here, which took me 5 weeks. That's the longest one I've had.
Thank you. Judge President Hlophe?
Thank you, Chief Justice. Good morning, Advocate Berger. I'm just going to ask, I confirm that you have acted in the division. You had 1 or 2 criminal trials, and you also had opposed motion. I can confirm that for the record. I just want to ask you 1 or 2 questions. The first one is this. Is there anything that you have done in your life to address the issue of skewed briefing patterns in the legal profession, with specific reference to empowering black women and African women in particular? That's the first question.
Yes. I've gone back and counted what juniors I've had in the past. It's not a high number because of the nature of my practice, but 50% of the people that have acted as a junior with me have been women, and some of them have been black women too. I have not done as much as I can, but I have done and made an effort to get women and also blacks to act as my juniors.
Secondly, it is common cause that there is racism on the bench, there is racism in the profession, and in South Africa in general, were you to be recommended for a permanent appointment by this commission, what steps would you take to assist the leadership of the judiciary in addressing the issue of racism on the bench and the profession in general? Thank you.
Judge President, racism is in South Africa and it will be with us for a long time. It is for all of us to speak up whenever it comes and say that is not right and do that.
Is it to speak or to look for how to combat it more effectively?
Chief Justice, it is both, but I'm not sure that I have a plan, and I think it is very good to have a discussion. I've really enjoyed my interaction with other judges on the bench, black judges on the bench, and how do we approach things and so on. I think the first step is speaking, and 2, if there are further steps to take, yes, one should do that.
Yes. Anyway, Ms. Stewart?
Thank you, Chief Justice. Advocate Berger, would it be fair to say that your practice as a silk has been predominantly maritime and maritime mercantile law?
Probably less than 50% at this stage is maritime law. It's a fair amount of commercial work. The maritime work in the last few years has really gone down. If you just look at the case numbers in the Cape Division, it's gone down. So I would say less than 50% of my work at this stage is probably maritime work.
And as far as I know, there's no black or female silks that specialize in maritime law at the Cape Bar. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You know why that is?
Historical briefing patterns. It is, there are actually very few. I think there may be 4 or 5 silks that I would count on my hand who do maritime work at the Cape Bar.
I understand, one more question, Chief Justice. I understand that there is a Masters in Maritime Law which UCT is running, and at the moment producing probably 20 to 30 Masters students every year. If the work is going down to the level that you think it is, do you think that UCT should be encouraged to produce more maritime lawyers for the Cape Bar?
I lecture at that program, and I've just been asked to act as external examiner in that program, so I've got a stake in that. I have a concern that people are doing this course and investing a lot of resources in the course with the hope of getting maritime work, where there just is not that much maritime work there. But it is a good course. It empowers people to learn and educate them. But how they run their academics and how they market their academic program, I don't have a view on that.
Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. Minister?
Thank you, Chief Justice, and good morning, Advocate Berger.
Good morning, Minister.
Just on the maritime law question, the current president has decided to prioritize taking full advantage of us being what you could call a maritime nation, given the longevity of our coastal line compared to any other country in the world, to explore all potential economic gains from that geographical advantage. Don't you think that in the medium to longer term, it would still be necessary to sustain capacity in the legal field in that area, given the fact that as local firms move out of some of the specialized areas, we're opening us up to international law firms coming in and basically taking over the work of local firms in the medium to longer term.
I agree that you need to keep the capacity and to train people. There might well be a change in the amount of work. I mean, it's a cyclical worldwide, and worldwide the maritime work is down, I'm told. A large percentage of the students at that master's program are foreign students. A lot of people from Africa, particularly Nigeria, Europe, and other places. But coming back to your question, yes, you do need skills, and it's good to teach people. Even if people are not necessarily going to use their academic degree, it's often a very good training. And I think it's a good thing. My concern is just, it is very, very hard for a young lawyer to start out and practice. And I'm concerned people incurring debt to study where it might not be as useful as they might have thought. But it's a good program, and it's a good thing to have that program.
Maybe just to clarify that question, I'm more looking at potential with government policy moving in the direction of harnessing that opportunity to say, isn't there space for a possible opening up of more opportunities, even in the public sector, given the policy direction?
Minister, I don't know whether that will create significant more posts for maritime lawyers. I think it would, but it depends on which way the policy is implemented. Yes, I can see there would be more of a demand, but I cannot see that it would be that significant an increase in the demand for maritime lawyers.
Yeah. And just the last thing relating to transformation of the profession, specifically the Cape Bar, which has become a pet subject. The woeful underrepresentation of black people in general, women, and especially Africans, continue to plague the image of the Cape Bar. Do you believe, and given yourself as one of the obviously senior members of that bar, and I suspect therefore having some influence on practices there, do you believe that as a collective, members of that bar, over 400 of you, white males especially, are doing enough to drive transformation collectively and ensuring that you bring back bring credibility to that bar insofar as its gender and racial composition is concerned?
Mister, let me first make it clear, I'm not a member of the Cape Bar Council. I've never been. Yes, I am a senior person there. I've only served on subcommittees, taxing and fee ombudsman. But can they do more? Yes, they can, and they are doing more. They've implemented policy that's compulsory to involve, with payment, women and black women in work, and they've, in effect, forced people to do that. There's some resistance to it. I think it's a good thing, and I think it will carry on, and they will build on. Can they do more? Yes, they can. Yes.
Sorry, Chief Justice, I think my question was more about the candidate telling us about his role in influencing that direction, more than just observing from a distance. But if you say you're not a member of the bar,
I'm not
saying you have no influence whatsoever. I just wanted to clarify that.
I have no influence other than speaking to my colleagues and expressing views on certain policies. I don't have any input in the Cape Bar Council's decisions.
Okay. Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you, Minister. Commissioner Nyambi?
Thank you, CJ. Afternoon, Mr. Peck.
Afternoon.
Any personal contribution in deepening transformation of the judicial in South Africa?
In a transformation of judiciary, I'm not quite understanding.
If you can share with us your personal contribution to advance transformation of judiciary in South Africa.
I don't have any influence on who gets appointed as judges. I don't quite understand the question.
Have you worked with?
Okay.
Have you worked with black attorneys or advocates?
Yes, a number of times.
Are you able to speak any of the African languages?
No. I grew up in the Western Cape, and when I grew up in the Western Cape, there was no causa being spoken. I left overseas immediately after, shortly after my university career. I came back to South Africa in 1995. There's very little causa spoken in the area where I am. Having said that, I've been busy trying to build a practice, bring up children. Having said that, some years ago I sat in a criminal trial presiding as a judge in a criminal trial where causa was a predominant language. And I really regretted not being able to speak that language. I really regret, and I wish I could. Unfortunately, at this stage of my life, I've tried to start learning causa. I find it very, very difficult. I'm not a linguist.
Why are you saying you are not a linguist?
I'm saying I'm not a linguist in the sense of I don't learn languages easily. I struggled to learn to speak English. I had a hard time speaking English.
Thanks, CJ.
Thank you.
Follow up.
Yes, Commissioner Malema.
I don't ask questions, CJ. I'm just follow up. Yeah. Which year did you leave the country where there was no Xhosa in the Western Cape? Because when John van Riebeeck arrived here, 1652, there was Xhosa in Eastern Cape, in the Western Cape, or wherever you were.
No, what I'm saying, it's not predominantly. It's very little, because of the apartheid policies, there were very few Xhosa-speaking people where I lived in Cape Town. It has changed since then. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying there were no people speaking Xhosa. I did not have the opportunity to interact with Xhosa-speaking people at that time.
You didn't have any domestic helper, no gardener, never went to a filling station and came across a petrol attendant who speaks the language, goes to Checkers or supermarket, and there are employees you need to ask a thing or two who are Xhosa speaking, and just out of interest. Let me not be hard on you. I don't know Chivenda, but there are security people in where I work. Hey, I try. I know Nda, and so on. Out of interest, I ask them. Nothing of that sort available to you?
Yes, Chief Justice. We've had a domestic worker when I was married, and I really tried to get her, especially to teach my children, speak Xhosa to my children. And for me to learn a few words. And unfortunately, she switched to Afrikaans, even though she was Xhosa speaking, and she spoke often Afrikaans to my children. But yes, there has been opportunities, and I've tried to learn a few words, but to be proficient at it, I'm sorry, I found that very difficult.
Minister, follow up?
My apologies, but you saying to us that you struggle with English, I must say my observation this morning is that actually you're quite proficient in English, and that's possibly because you made it your business, even though you're Afrikaans speaking, to become proficient in English, and so it can happen with any other language. Wouldn't you agree with me that it's not just a question of being a linguist, but it's also, you know, how compelling it is it for you to learn any language?
Yes, Minister, I agree with you. When I said I struggle with English, when I went to university the first time, I purposefully went to University of Cape Town to learn to speak English properly. I was concerned about that. But you're quite correct. It is how much of a will and how much of a compelling reason there is. Over the years, there's been other more compelling things in my life. But you're quite correct. I could have made more of an effort. When I came back to this country, there were other demands on my time. But I take the point. I could have done more, and I have tried to learn a few words, and I've struggled with it. I've struggled with the pronunciation.
Yeah. No, I was just trying to say, Chief Justice, that it helps us for candidates to be candid with us in terms of giving us the proper context under which they have failed or have done certain things. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Commissioner Msomi.
Thanks, CJ. Good afternoon, Advocate Berger.
Good afternoon, Commissioner.
Just two questions from me. Obviously, when interviews of this nature arise, people are allowed to make comments. The Law Teachers Association makes a very interesting conversation or observation, and I would like your comment on it. They say the candidate does not explain how lecturing master's students in law at the University of Cape Town and lawyers at the Black Lawyers Association is significant as a contribution to the pursuit of justice in South Africa. They say this is vague. Are you able to comment and perhaps enlighten the Law Teachers Association as to what you meant when you answered this question in the manner you did?
The question is what have I done that's most? In my mind, giving my time as a volunteer to teach both at University of Cape Town, to educate them, to help them become better lawyers, and to the Black Lawyers Association. That is helpful. That is the best I did, and that is why I put the answer down the way I did.
Thank you. One other comment, and it's a comment that is made by a Mohammed Salih SC, who is a member of AFT, Western Cape. He makes a contribution in respect of various candidates, but when it comes to you and one Derek Ville, I hope I'm pronouncing the surname correctly, he says, I have no, or rather, we express no opinion on Becca SC. And they go on to say, because we haven't had an interaction with him basically in a professional capacity. How do you respond to this? Is it not strange that a senior member of the profession will not be known to us, another senior member of the profession in that province?
He's known to me, I'm known to him. I've had a conversation with him. I think what he's saying is that he hasn't litigated against me or dealt with me in a professional capacity where he can evaluate me for the purpose for judicial evaluation. I simply read it as basically no comment as opposed to a negative comment because he's not able to comment.
Thank you so much. In recent times, Advocate Becker, the Constitutional Court in our country has handed down interesting judgments. Which judgment for you stands out? Why does it stand out? And how does that judgment, in your view, contribute to the development of our jurisprudence? And lastly, what do you think is the role of the judiciary in a developmental state like ours? Thank you.
Dealing with the first question, the question of significant judgments, and it's not that recent, but the judgment abolishing the death penalty, in my mind, is the most significant. And for me personally, it is the most important judgment. And I'll say that is, when I first started my career as an advocate, I did pro deos. I did lots of them. I defended people on the capital charges. And it is, the brashness of youth. I just did it. But over the years, I've really given thought to that process, and my thoughts have changed. I don't want a death penalty ever again. That wasn't my views some years ago, and I think it's the most significant contribution. In spite of not being the popular view, that judgment of the Constitutional Court, I think, is the most important. The second question, sorry,
the second question was the role of the judiciary in a developmental state. But in respect of the first question that I asked, I was hoping that you will reflect, because the abolition of the death penalty has been part of our lives now for a long, long time.
Yeah.
I was hoping that you will reflect on the recent judgments, perhaps handed down 6-7 months or even a year or so ago, and how do you see those having contributed to the development of our jurisprudence, particularly under the leadership of the current Chief Justice? Thank you.
The cases dealing with the separation of powers, I find that very interesting. The extent to which they affirm that the Constitution is supreme. That I find significant. As for the role of the judiciary, it's related to that, is that ultimately the Constitution is supreme, and it's for judiciary to decide where the bounds are, to what extent they can interfere with the executive. And the Constitution determines to what extent the courts can do that. Now, I've heard criticisms recently that possibly they've been overstepping it, the bounds of taking over administrative actions. I think there's more litigation to come on those issues. To what extent should they make decisions and substitute their decision for the executive?
Colleagues, time. One has posed 4 questions, another preamble after preamble. Please, colleagues. Commissioner Schmidt.
Thank you, Chief Justice. Just a matter of interest. On the issue of your CV, which on the electronic copy comes after your nomination form, but I'm trying to understand how your CV runs, because you indicate there from 1995 to present, you were practicing as an advocate at the Cape Bar since 1 April 2011 as senior counsel. Then, but further down, you say 1987 to 1998, practice as an advocate at the Cape Bar. There seems to be an overlap, which I don't understand, and there seems to be a distinction, which I don't understand. So, could you just put that into perspective?
I studied, I did a master's overseas. I came back, I did articles for 2 years plus a bit. Then I was admitted as an attorney. I was removed as attorney, became an advocate. I did pupillage at that stage. I think it was 3 months or 4 months. Then I practiced in 1987-88 at the Cape Bar as an advocate. And then my immigration visa to the United States came through, and I left in May 1988 that I went to the States. Then in March 1995, I returned, and I've been practicing as an advocate at the Cape Bar since March 1995.
Well, now I understand it, because that should then read 1987 to 1988, not 1998. So if you
Mine reads May 1988.
There's a separate page, I'm not going to make a big issue about it, but there's a separate page which right on top says Lance Berger, SC, professional and other work experience, followed by academic qualification, and I'm speaking from that particular document.
I think you're looking at one of the comments. I saw some mistakes in some of the comments as opposed to looking at my own questionnaire and CV. I noticed there were some typographical mistakes in one of the comments that was made on me.
It may be, but it follows, or it's just before your Alaskan Bar Association certificate, with a Cape Bar certificate, etc. So it forms part of your pack of documents, which on the face of it has been submitted with your nomination. But I'll leave it there, Mr. Chairman. Can I just on one other issue, Chief Justice? There's also, interestingly, on that same document, an indication that you practiced as an attorney at law in Seattle, Washington, USA from 1988 to 1995. Well, that would make sense in light of your
yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got no further questions, Chief Justice.
Thank you, Commissioner Schmidt. Commissioner Norman.
Thank you, Chief Justice. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioner.
Yes, good morning.
I don't know what you all say morning when it's past 1. The minister said it as well.
Thank you, Chief. Good afternoon. I understand that you would have lent, you would have made an effort to make sure that you're proficient in English because you needed it for your maritime practice. Am I correct?
I learned English because that was because I had to learn it to become a lawyer. At that stage, you needed Afrikaans, English, and Latin. And I learned it, and because I was in an English environment, I became proficient at it.
And you would have made a great effort to make sure that you understand it because it was necessary because of the nature of maritime law being an English law, basically. So you would have wanted it, and you wanted to master that so that you would be able to deal with your maritime practice effectively.
It wasn't restricted to maritime. I made an effort to learn the language of English for the sake of my practice, not necessarily maritime, but yes, you are correct. I made an effort to learn to speak English.
Yes, thank you. And then lastly, now then you've mentioned that you've worked with 2 juniors from Cape Town that you work with from time to time, black juniors, am I correct? Did you mention 2 or am I wrong?
I think there were more than 2.
Okay.
Really?
Now, in the maritime practice, your shipping practice, how many juniors do you use, black juniors?
The maritime shipping practice do not use juniors that often. Certainly the practice I have, we don't use juniors that often. In fact, the last 2 years, there's been very little maritime work where I've appeared. In other matters, I've used black juniors. There was another transport law. I don't recall that I've used a black junior myself working with me in a maritime thing. I've recommended a black junior to a firm of shipping law people to suggest that they use her.
Yes. And then lastly, do you do any shipping work from Transnet?
I used to do a lot of shipping work from Transnet when there was a black attorney, Mr. Matikinko, that used to get a lot of shipping work from them. And that was years ago. I have not had shipping work from Transnet for, I think, for 10 years.
Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you, Commissioner Norman. Commissioner Nyambi?
No,
It was an error?
yeah.
Oh, okay,
No,
I'm sorry.
I've
Commissioner,
asked my questions.
oh, okay. Do I have the wrong thing? No. Commissioner Mpofu?
Thank you, Chief Justice. Okay, in the interest of time, I want to ask you the question on language, because I think you've been asked a lot on it. Just simply to say that in my first year, I had to do 3 foreign languages, English, Afrikaans, and Latin. And I wish I had the choice to have said I'm not a linguist, and I just want to study law. Yeah. But anyway, the question I really wanted to ask you is, I find it quite difficult, if you've been a member of the profession, of the bar in particular, for, let's say, 22 years, let's forget that 1988 stint, that you've never served on the Bar Council. The bar only functions through the Bar Council, I'm sure you'll agree, and it would just disintegrate without it. So how have you managed? It's a difficult feat, I'm sure, to achieve. So there must be a way in which one can do it. How did you manage to just be so passive for so many years and not play any role in the affairs of the profession?
I have not been passive. I've worked for many, many years as a taxing secretary of the bar. That involved a lot of work. It's probably one of the subcommittees that do the most work. And I did that. The fact that I haven't been at the top body doesn't mean to say I haven't done my fair share of work for the Cape Bar. I worked as a taxing secretary. In the end, I became the chief of the tax secretary. When that fell away, I became one of the fee ombudsmen, where you sit on fee disputes between attorneys and counsel. Some 2 years ago, the chairman of the Bar Council came to me and say, please, won't you come and run for the Bar Council? And I said, if you ask me, because I had a very high regard for, yes, I'll put my name forward, And he said, I would be unelected. And then there was some problems with that, and then there were more candidates, and I didn't remove my name in spite of the promise of being unopposed, and I was not elected. But it's not a case of that I was shirking my duty. I've done more than my fair share, not just in terms of fee disputes, but I've also been appointed as disciplinary, to do disciplinary hearings of the council. I've also spent a lot of time defending somebody before the bar in a disciplinary hearing. I do my fair share.
Okay. Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you, Commissioner Mbofu. Commissioner Didiza.
Thank you, CJ. Good afternoon, Mr. Becker.
Good afternoon.
I notice in your form on page 3.8 on the name of organizations and membership of any political organization, you said you applied for student membership of the Progressive Party in approximately 1979. You do not recall that you became the member.
Yes.
That is not my interest. My interest is, what was the motivating factor for you at the time to want to join the Progressive Party instead of the National Party, Conservative Party, particularly at that period in our country? What would have been the motivation?
The motivation was that I wanted, I did not agree, but I was still young and forming my views, and I thought, well, I must do more, and the Progressive Party was the only party against apartheid in that regime parliament. And that is why I thought I wanted to join. And it's many years ago. As I recall, I sent it off, the application form or something. I didn't hear anything further about it. But the motivation was that one needs to live in a society, you need to be involved in politics. And the Progressive Party was against apartheid, was the one that my views were most aligned with.
Did those views remain or change at some stage as you grew up?
No, it strengthened. It strengthened in the sense of apartheid is completely, utterly wrong.
So you didn't do anything in terms of either after your student activism to work in organizations such as the Legal Resources Center and others that were supportive of those who were fighting against apartheid?
No, I did not as a student. The only thing that I do as a student, I was one of the students that ran a legal aid clinic on the Cape Flats to give advice. That is what I did as a student. After I finished university, I had 2 years of military service, and I wanted to get out of the country. And yes, you've seen my CV, and then when I could, I got out of the country.
Okay, CJ, the last one is related to your contribution to law and the pursuit of justice. There's a case you mentioned there. Maybe you can share with us what's the significance of that case in your view. What is it that it contributed to law and pursuit of justice in our country?
Sorry, which one are you referring to?
It's on point 10 on the questionnaire. You're mentioning your representation which you made on behalf of indigent sufferers in the MT Agun case.
Yeah.
What is significant about that case? Did it change the current maritime law, or did it bring in international perspective which you thought was important? What was so significant about it?
Okay. I have represented all my professional career, from my days as an article clerk, I've represented seafarers. They really oppress people. And as an article clerk, I went and brought a claim for wages for cause of fishermen who, with the owner, just refused to pay. The firm allowed me to do that, and I've really enjoyed it. And I've done those kind of things all my career. Now, the MT Argon is a very significant case from a jurisdiction point of view. But to me, anybody who's oppressed should get legal representation. Now, the crew of the MT Argon had not been paid. an attorney was concerned about bringing this case and getting counsel. And my view is, I'll represent them. Don't worry about the fees. We can, if there's money later on, we can sort it out. It is significant from a legal point of view, and it is significant because it helped the seafarers who were not paid and wouldn't have been paid.
Maybe just the last one as a follow-up to that one. Did you, given the category of seafarers, as you say, have you considered, after representing them for so long, that they should actually form part of our Labor Relations Act, particularly categories like your farm workers, where you have to do determination of wages, so that it's not dependent on a company whether they wish to pay them today or they don't wish to pay them tomorrow?
I've not given that consideration. In maritime law, seafarers are very well protected in law. The practicalities is a bit different. If an owner doesn't pay, it doesn't pay. But there are people who will represent seafarers to get their wages. The International Transport Workers Federation is quite active. And in fact, in that empty organ, some of my fees were paid by the International Transport Workers Federation. I don't see the solution as being a change in law. I see the solution in making sure that people get legal representation. And to a large extent, they do get it, because there are people like me, if they come to me and say, we don't have money, there's seafarers that need to be exempted, I'll be there every time.
Thank you, President.
Thank you, Commissioner Didiza. Commissioner Masu.
Thank you, President. Good morning, Mr. Berger.
Good morning.
I must disclose that Mr. Berger is a colleague of mine at the Cape Bar. For what it's worth, we acted together as well in the High Court. I just have one question to ask you, and it relates to how you think the courts can be effective institutions of combating racism, unfair discrimination, socioeconomic rights. And I have in mind here the improvements that can be made to the effective functioning of the Quality Court. Because it's one of the, as you know, it's one of the courts that are specifically established to deal with these aspects. Which aspects of them could be improved?
I don't have all the solutions. I think there is a place for the Equality Court, and they're developing their own jurisprudence. And it's fairly new jurisprudence. But there's a role to play in the daily work of the courts. I can't think of suggestions right now how to improve that.
Just a follow-up on that. Have you been able to assess whether the Quality Court has sufficiently been used for the purpose of ensuring that disputes involving discrimination are dealt with effectively?
I have not assessed that or formed a view on that.
Thank you, Mr. Berger.
Thank you, Commissioner Masuku. Mr. Berger, you're excused. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for your time.